Welcome to Viewpoints. In today's student thesis series, we're here with Cal Bowman, Chairman for the Baltimore Urban Area Security Initiative. Welcome, Cal.
Thank you.
So tell me how you came up with your thesis topic.
A few years ago when we were rewriting our Urban Area Security Initiative strategy, I remember meeting Dave Kaufman and reading through his Crisis Response and Disaster Resilience 2030 paper FEMA put out. And really it had a tremendous impact. I was just fascinated by the outside the box thinking and the thinking of problems that we haven't yet experienced, problems that are coming 20, 30 years down the road. And that just fascinated me. And then fast forward a few years when I came here for the emergency leadership program, or the executive leadership program, I got to talk to Rodrigo. And Rodrigo started introducing me to concepts coming out of Silicon Valley. Things that are happening with the XPRIZE Foundation, exponential technologies, disruptive technologies, and how that's changing the environment we live in. And having lived through a lot of these emerging technologies, I was fascinated with how is that applicable to today's Homeland Security environment. So when I got into the master's program, I was so excited to be able to kind of explore this topic and learn a little bit more about it.
So your thesis is on DHS's grand challenges. Can you describe those?
Yeah, so right now, the private and the public sector do a really good job of identifying and defining and addressing grand challenges. The XPRIZE does a great job in looking at some of these moonshot problems, as we call them. How do we colonize Mars? How do we eradicate hunger? How do we change or deliver drinking water supplies? And the public sector does it too. DARPA does a great job of creating new disruptive technologies, whether it's GPS systems, stealth technology, the internet. I was really interested in how we can translate that in the Homeland Security world. What are the Homeland Security grand challenges? But more importantly, how do we define that? Who defines it, and how do they address those problems?
What did you find?
So one thing that we learned was a lot of these other organizations that really do a good job of solving these problems, that define them, they have a culture that's really unlike a lot of places you see. They have autonomy, they have independence, they have a motivation to create disruptive technologies, and at the end of the day, there's not this fear of failure, because I think they take a look at failure as a learning opportunity on how not to do something, or how they can learn how to solve some of these grand challenges.
These problems you're looking at 20 years ahead of time, with technology being so innovative and dynamic and changing so rapidly. How does that all work?
Yeah, nothing is static here. One thing that we learned through the tragic events of 9/11 was that there was a failure of imagination. One thing DARPA does very well, exceedingly well, is they have this environment to be imaginative. And I don't know that we see that today in our Homeland Security environment. And so I think developing a culture to be imaginative, to think outside the box, to think 30 years down the road of things that are going to be problems, and looking at the drivers of change today that will impact those challenges tomorrow. The shifting demographics, climate change. Some of those large drivers are really going to push forward how we operate in the future, and they're going to be the ones that are going to define what those grand challenges are in the long run.
And so when you talk about changing culture, that's really difficult, especially in more of the public workspace. It doesn't matter whether it's local, state, or federal. There's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of regulations. So do you have any tips?
Yeah, well, this thesis really starts to identify how, especially DARPA, again, going back to them, how they were able to break through that red tape, how they were able to cut through the red tape. And a lot of that is based on their culture of independence. Mm-hmm. They have a proven track record. They have proven results. And I think that gives them some of the flexibility that, some of our other government agencies don't really get to benefit from. And I think over time, as we develop this, and we try to develop this culture of trust and autonomy and independence within, whether it's DHS or just the Homeland Security enterprise at large, I think we'll start to get a little bit more flexibility and be more motivated to be innovative. And that will allow us, and even failures, mm-hmm. understanding that failure is a part of that process. And those failures will allow us to be more imaginative, more innovative, and to create those solutions to the grand challenges that we're going to see coming down the road.
And when you were looking at those failures, and this is just for folks out there to really look at that as an asset, really. Do you have any examples of where the failure actually turned out to be something good?
Well, sure. For example, the XPRIZE Foundation about 10 years ago had the Archon Genome Project, XPRIZE, where really they wanted to map the entire human DNA structure. it was an XPRIZE because there was a market failure there. It was extremely expensive and extremely time-consuming to map out somebody's entire DNA structure. So XPRIZE decided to create a prize competition that will innovate and stimulate that kind of solution, to find solutions for that, using a crowdsourcing methodology. But what they found was the market started developing at its own pace. And the market outside of the XPRIZE found the solution faster than the XPRIZE challenge did. So even while it was a failure and they canceled the XPRIZE, and the only one they've ever canceled, while it may have been considered a failure as an XPRIZE, they still were able to find the solution based on kind of encouraging that market.
Wow.
And I think that if we can do that in Homeland Security, we're going to come to find out that there's a lot of solutions out there that we haven't even thought of yet.
So when you're looking at successes in the future of your research, could you give me some examples?
Sure. The XPRIZE has a great track record of innovation. They did the XPRIZE and Sorry Challenge, or XPRIZE. That's where they put commercial spacecraft into suborbit twice within a bounded period. I believe it was 6 weeks. And I think the purse was $10 million for that. What did that do? Well, that stimulated commercial space travel. And before that XPRIZE came out, commercial space travel was not even on the table. Space travel, space exploration was restricted very restrictively to NASA. Nobody in the public sector or private sector was working on it. And I think this opened up doors for millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to come through that market and to create a new market for possible commercial space tourism.
So say you're some state or local official and you really want to see change and you have a vision for change. What would your advice be to them?
Change is hard, especially disruptive change. And it's hard because it creates a new market, and your organization may not be geared towards that new market or to address that new market. Your mission statement may say one thing, but because this disruptive innovation is coming along, it may change the entire way your organization goes about solving some of these problems or addresses their current mission. We see a lot of that. We saw that with Kodak. Kodak was a company that was, a large millions and millions of dollar company, and because they did not adapt to the emerging market of digital technology, digital photos, in 5 years they were quickly out of business.
Well, that's a great warning for our local, state, and federal partners, because if they aren't adaptable and resilient and looking at change before our adversaries, things can really go wrong really quickly, and the stakes are far greater than a corporation.
Yeah, I think that you said it there perfectly. The opportunity to be creative and the opportunity to innovate is going to be something that we're going to have to make a key element of our strategies moving forward in the long run.
And so if you had to write another chapter in your thesis, what would it include?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with this thesis, taking a deep dive into how we define the problem, how the problem is defined, I should say, and how it's addressed. What it doesn't do is actually identify what the grand challenges are. If I could write another 100 pages, I would probably start taking that deep dive into what are the Homeland Security grand challenges. But the good news is there's a lot of research to be done. And for the next person to come along and pick up and say, hey, I want to run with this thesis and expand on it, I think there's a great opportunity to do that there.
Great. Well, thank you for the research you conducted. I'm sure it's going to do great things in our country.
Thank you very much, Heather.